Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, beloved. I want to welcome you once more again to Eastern's Couch Talk on this Shabbat day, on the 4th of October, as we celebrate the set-apart times of Yahweh. Today I've just diverted a little bit from the prophetic studies that we've been doing in this series. I just wanted to weigh in also on the discussion that has been going on about the Sabbath. In the United States, we heard of a man called Chiwenga who was killed, and the word goes that he was a Sabbath keeper, and there's been a lot of talk about the Sabbath. And also we had the Pope coming in also talking about the Sabbath, saying that Saturday is the Sabbath. And there's been a lot of discussion around the Sabbath. And in Zimbabwe, recently there was a discussion about the Sabbath between two men, one who calls himself Apostle Chiwenga and the other Evangelist Marufu from the SDA Church. They were discussing, or if I may say, they were debating about the issue of the Sabbath. And as I was listening, I was also drafting my own responses, especially to Chiwenga, who is against the keeping of the seventh-day Sabbath. And he says the seventh-day Sabbath is no longer relevant to the Christians or the believers of today. And so I want to weigh in also and share my views with regards to this discussion on the Sabbath. So I'm going to try to exhaustively answer the questions that Chiwenga brought to the view, and share with you my own thoughts and interpretations of Scripture, and you see and judge for yourself if Chiwenga was correct or he was in error. As far as I'm concerned, he is lost, he is in error. What he is teaching his people, or what he presented there, it's very far from the truth, and it was a clear misinterpretation of what the word of Yahweh teaches in the Scriptures. So he started off by quoting Romans chapter 10 verse 4. But I'm not just going to read one verse. I want to read the whole passage around that verse, which he thinks announces the Sabbath, or announces the keeping of the Torah, or announces the living by the standard that Yahweh gave. So in Romans 10 verse 1 we start, "Truly, brothers, my heart's desire and a prayer to Elohim for Yeshua is for deliverance." And remember, you see, when you study the Scripture, don't dwell on one verse. Dwell in the context of the passage, even the chapter before and the chapter after. It helps a lot for you to understand what is the subject matter that is being dealt with here. So when you look at Romans 9, 10, and 11, it is talking about the restoration of Yeshua right at the end of the time. That's the subject matter there. So Yeshua had been privileged and had been given the truth, had been given the belief of Elohim, so that they become the priest to the world. Then they become the light to the world. But they did not live according to the instructions of Yahweh. They did not worship him according to the instructions that he had given them. And they ended up creating a religion of them for themselves, right? Which was essentially a syncretic system of religion that had mixed the truth and error. And unfortunately, the things that were supposed to guide them unto the truth, they ended up worshiping those things instead of worshiping the one to whom those things were guiding them to. For instance, the Torah or the law ended up becoming like an idol for the children of Yashua, because they ended up almost like worshiping the Torah rather than worshiping the giver of the Torah. That's the problem that we see Yashua facing here. It's elevating the Torah over and above the one who is supposed to be worshipped, the giver of that Torah. So you are going to see as we go into this discussion that this is the issue that Shaul is addressing here. So verse 2 says, "For I bear them witness that they have an ardor for Elohim, but not according to knowledge. They have a zeal for Elohim, but not according to knowledge. For not knowing the righteousness of Elohim and seeking to establish their own righteousness, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of Elohim." So they didn't know the righteousness of Elohim. So they instead tried to create a righteousness for themselves based on the customs, traditions, and the way they observed and understood the instructions that Yahweh had given them. So it says, "For Mashiach is the goal of the Torah unto righteousness to everyone who believes." So for them, when Mashiach came, because they had already settled themselves into a certain structure, into a certain standard of righteousness, when Mashiach came, who is the end or the goal of the Torah, they could not see it, they could not understand it. For Mashiach writes about the righteousness which is of the Torah. "The man who does this shall live by them," and instead they did not live even by that Torah. They didn't. They didn't. So KJV says, "For Mashiach is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth." So this is the verse that the young man Chiwenga brings up and tries to use it as a defense against obeying the Torah of Elohim. Now, when Scripture says Yahusha Mashiach is the end of the law or Torah, it means he is the goal, or properly the point aimed at as a limit, by implication, the conclusion of the Torah. So when you go through the Torah, you must see Yahusha, because he is the subject matter that is being discussed in the Torah. It's not the end as in annulment or banning, as what Chiwenga is actually coming up with. No. The coming of Yahusha does not mean the banning or annulling of the doing away of the Torah. No, it doesn't mean that. So when one reads the Torah, you must understand that the Torah or the law is pointing at Yahusha. That is why Yahusha himself says in the book of Yahukanan, in chapter 5, verse 45, he says, "Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father." So who is going to accuse you to the Father? He says, "There is one that accuseth you, even Mashiach, in whom you trust." So even Yahusha, when he comes, he says the one that accuses them, the one that judges them, is Mashiach. The writings of Mashiach are the ones that are going to judge, are going to accuse them, are going to expose their wickedness. It is the writing of Mashiach which is the standard that is going to reveal their evil, their wickedness, their lawlessness. Verse 46 says, "For had you believed Mashiach, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me." Do you hear that? This is the master saying it It's not man saying it. He is the one himself. He is saying it. He's saying Masha wrote about him. Right? Verse 47 says, but if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words? So, the writings of Masha are about Yahusha. And those writings are the ones that judge everyone. But favor is through accepting the sacrifice of Yahusha, dying for the sins of humanity. And sin, scripture says, is the breaking of the Torah. And the Chiwenga tried to play some gymnastics here. And they say, 1 John chapter 3 verse 4 does not refer to the Torah. But when you read 1 John chapter 3 verse 2 says, beloved, now are we sons of Elohim, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. For we shall see him as he is. Now, to be like Yahusha is to be sinless. That is to be righteous, pure, humble, meek, patient, loving, kind, and merciful. That's what Yahusha is. That's how he is described. And so when you are going to be like him, you are going to be sinless. You are going to be without sin. And 1 John chapter 3 verse 3 says, and every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. Verse 4, whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the Torah, for sin is the transgression of the Torah. Right? So the word law, which is given in the English, is actually nomos, which takes its interpretation from the word Torah. Right? Nomos is Torah. That's the Greek version of the Torah. So when you read the word law in the New Testament, you are actually reading the word law or Pentateuch or the Torah. And that is the standard that measures what sin is. It is the only definition of what sin is lawlessness. It is being Torahless. So Yahukanan is not talking of any other law besides that law. In Luke, Yahusha further says, that's verse 25, then he said unto them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Messiah to have suffered these things and to enter into his esteem? So he's talking about those two men, those two disciples who were on their way to Emmaus. So they are worried, they are perturbed that Yahusha, the one that they hoped to become the governor, to become the king of Yahshua, who would save them from the Roman rule, he had been killed and he had been put into the sepulchre, and so all their hopes had been dashed. And so he comes, he meets them. In verse 27 he says, and beginning at Masha, and all the prophets he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Very clear. Yahusha says he begins at Masha and all the prophets. So from Masha right through to the prophets, they are all talking about him. Right? Masha wrote about the ministration of the Messiah in symbols. Let's look at Yahukanan chapter 1 verse 29. The next day Yahukanan seeth Yahusha coming unto him, and they say, behold the Lamb of Elohim, which taketh away the sin of the world. So when Masha is writing about the lamb that is being sacrificed there in the Torah, that lamb is a symbol of Yahusha, the true Lamb of Elohim, which is going to come now to be sacrificed for the sins of the world. And not only there in verse in John chapter 1 verse 36, he says there, sorry, 29, I just read 29. I want to go to 36. And looking upon Yahusha as he walked, he said, behold the Lamb of Elohim. So the ministration of the Torah is fulfilled by Yahusha, the perfect Lamb sacrifice. So whatever service that the Torah, the service unto salvation, that the Torah is revealing, that service, that ministration finds its fulfillment in Yahusha, the perfect Lamb of Elohim. And Yahusha fulfills righteousness demanded by the Torah by him living a sinless life. So he fulfills the Torah by becoming the lamb that is sacrificed. He fulfills the demands of the Torah by living a righteous life, because the Torah required that everyone that liveth according to the instructions of Yahuwah had to be sinless, had to be someone who did not break the Torah. It had to be someone who was righteous, and this is the life of Yahusha. He lived that life of righteousness and was found without sin, and thus Yahusha satisfied the demands, the requirements of the Torah. Thus he gave his life by dying on the stake to transact that life usward. There was no other way that life could come to us besides him dying and shedding his blood so that it may be transacted to us. For scripture says, for the life is in the blood. And when the blood is poured out and shed for many, it means that the life has been given to all. That's what scripture teaches. Therefore, Yahusha becomes the end or goal or the point aimed at by the Torah. Right? It doesn't mean that the Torah, when Yahusha comes, then the Torah, the instructions of the Torah are then annulled, they are then banned. The Torah is pointing at Yahusha. Essentially, him dying on the stake confirms and upholds the Torah or the law. It is much easier just to do away with the law without having to die. The fact that he died, Yahusha fulfilled the demands of the Torah. That means that he is upholding those demands. So his death does not annul the requirements of the Torah. If anything, it upholds and makes those requirements permanent, right? He is ratifying those demands of the Torah. His death is not doing away with the demands of the Torah, but rather he is actually upholding them. You understand that? So we must understand the issues that are being dealt by in these scriptures. The next verse that Chiwenga picked up is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Beloved, when we cherry pick verses and try to build a doctrine out of those verses, there is a danger of creating doctrines contrary to the context of the setting in which the verses are found. It's not wise at all just to cherry pick a verse and then you run with it without understanding the setting in which that verse is couched in, whether before it or after it, right? This is very pivotal for anyone to have a correct interpretation of scripture, because that guides that text which you want to run with. Get the whole context before and after, and then you'll be able now to build a true doctrine of the scripture. Now it looks like Chiwenga and generally the Christians, their way of study of scripture is not wholesome. Now let's look at the second verse that Chiwenga is using to nail the Torah on the Christian cross, with the rest of other verses within the immediate context of the passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. First of all, the Torah is given in a well-defined structure. This is very pivotal to understand. You need to understand the structure of the Torah. If you don't understand the structure of the Torah, it is going to be very difficult. Like I always say, there are two main structures in the Torah. There is the book of the covenant and the book of the law, right? The book of the covenant ending specifically, okay, it starts from Exodus chapter 19, but the book of the covenant essentially starts from Genesis chapter 1, right? And then it ends in Shemoth, right? I can read for you the last verse of the book of the covenant in the book of Shemoth, right? So in chapter 24, there is the ratification of the book of the covenant in verse 6, right? I will read that. It says, and Masha took half the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled it on the slaughter place. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that Yahweh has spoken we shall do and obey. And Masha took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, see, the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you concerning all these words. And Masha went up also Aharon, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Yashara'ah. And they saw Elohim of Yashara'ah, and under his feet like a paved work, on sapphire stone, and like the heavens for brightness. Yet he did not stretch out his hand against the chiefs of the children of Yashara'ah. And they saw Elohim, and they ate and they drank. So that was the covenant confirming meal that they took up to verse 11. That's when the book of the covenant is ratified. But when you read from Shemoth 24 verse 12, now it starts to talk about the book of the law, right? So it says, and Yahweh said unto Masha, come up to me on the mountain and be there while I give you tablets of stone and the Torah and the command which I have written to teach them. And Masha arose with his assistant Yahushua, and Masha went up to the mountain to Elohim. That's where he was given the law that he was writing in the book. When he went into this was the seventh ascent, the seventh time that he went up the mountain, and he was given now the laws that he wrote in the book. But you should not miss this, that even in the book, the 10 commandments are also found there, right? You should not miss that even in the book of the covenant, the statutes are there. The statutes that have got to do with the feast, they are there in the book of the covenant. And the statutes that have got to do with the feast, they are there in the book of the law. The only difference between the book of the covenant and the book of the law is the law of Aaronic priesthood that had to do with the sacrifices that Aaron had to do in the temple service, right? That's the distinction between the book of the covenant, because of the priesthood that is being initiated into the book of the law. That's the distinction. Right? We shall dwell further on that, and we are going to see how this works out. So first, there are the 10 commandments, right? In fact, Shaul says we should rightly divide the word, right? So what is the division point, or what is the dividing point? The dividing point is there in Shemoth chapter 24 verse 11. That's the dividing point. From there, going backwards to Bereshit chapter 1 verse 1, we are dealing with the book of the covenant, right? Now from there, going up, when Masha ascends into the mountain again to be given and then to write the laws that Yahweh is giving him, that's the beginning of the book of the law. That's the point of division. That's where you divide So when you will rightly divide the book, when you rightly divide the word, when you rightly divide the law, then you are going to see that in the structure of the Torah, there are the 10 commandments, which is like the contents section of the book. Now, this gives you the subject matter contained in the Torah as a book. Right? This law pointed to one's sin or righteousness. It was and is still the standard of life. So the 10 commandments are like the contents that you will find in the book. At the beginning of the book, there will be content pages there. And it is telling you what you are going to find in the book. That's what the 10 commandments do. They give you the content of what is found in the Torah. Then you will also find that the Torah has got what are called statutes. The statutes explain or they amplify and they give light to the 10 commandments. So each of those commandments has got its own statutes that explain it. Right? So you can't nail the statutes on the cross because they've got to do with the 10 commandments. Right? This is the problem that Christian teaching has got. Even those Seventh-day Adventists, they don't understand it. They always talk about this ceremonial law. You really wonder, where do they get that kind of theology from the scriptures themselves? Because the scriptures don't talk about ceremonial law at all. They talk about the laws of sacrifices, the laws of Aaronic priesthood. And we must distinguish the sacrifices from the feasts themselves, because the Sabbath is a feast that had sacrifices also. We don't throw away the Sabbath because of the sacrifices. Neither should we throw away Passover because of the sacrifices, or the Feast of Tabernacles because of the sacrifices, or the Feast of Shavuot, right, because of the sacrifices. You don't throw away the Feast of Trumpets because of the sacrifices. You don't throw away the Feast of Atonement because of the sacrifices. The sacrifices were there, and it is these that the scriptures make clear that there is one sacrifice once and for all, the sacrifice of Yahusha, which is now going to take the place of the lambs. But it takes the place of the lambs in these festivals, right? In these worship systems. You don't annul the worshiping systems because of the sacrifices. This is what Adventists need to understand. You need to understand that. So the statutes explain, amplify, and give light to the 10 commandments. So without the statutes, you cannot correctly interpret the 10 commandments. So what the 10 commandments are, so are the statutes. So you have a commandment that talks about adultery, or that talks about killing, or that talks about honoring your parents. All those commandments have got statutes that reinforce those commandments, that explain those commandments. So you would not know what it is to honor the parents until you go. You do not have a full extent of understanding of what the scriptures require of you in terms of honoring the parents until you go into the statutes. Similarly, you would not know the full extent covered by the commandment of adultery until you go to the statutes that explain, expound, and amplify what adultery is all about. So, any wise person, you can't stand on the 10 commandments on its own and hope that you have made it, you have got it done and made. No. That's why scripture says the commandment is a lamp, right? And the Torah is the light. You need to understand that. The commandment is a lamp there. But without the statutes which are found in the Torah, you cannot have any, that lamp could not be of much use to you. So the statutes, the light which comes out of the lamp, are the ones essentially that explain the commandments. I hope someone is understanding that. So the third part of the Torah, of the Pentateuch is the Levitical priesthood law. You find that in the book of the law, right? This had to do with Aaronic priesthood, its sacrificial system, and temple services. This was an interim solution to the sin problem. So Yeshua, if they sinned, right, this was their only way of escape, right? The sacrificial system was not against them. It was given to them as a way of escape. And so when they sinned, they would take a lamb and slaughter it, right, and confess their sins on its head, and then slaughter it. And then that blood was the same blood that was taken into the sanctuary. So this law was not against Yeshua. It provided a way of escape for the transgressors. But it would be superseded by the Melchizedek priesthood. The priesthood of Aaron and its sacrificial system would cease because of the one and only great sacrifice of Yahusha, who is the Melchizedek priest. Right. Then comes the civil laws and judgments. Civil laws guided the administration of the society, guided things like agriculture, business, right? And judgments are the sentences of breaking the moral Torah. So when one breaks the moral Torah, there were judgments given for each of those laws, right? These judgments included death, penalty, depending on the seriousness of the transgression. This was a law clearly against the sinner. Then last but not least, the health laws. As one can see, these health laws had to do with the well-being of the people of Yeshua. So this was a good law for them. As long as they obeyed the health laws, they would flourish in their health. Now, when you go into these laws and understand how they function, one can see that these laws, they actually overlapped into each other. Now, when we approach the writings of Shaul, we need to have this above understanding. Let's delve into 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. This is another passage that Chiwenga also quoted to try and annul the law. It says there, who also has made us able ministers. Shaul is writing, they had been made able ministers, right? And others that worked in the vineyard of Yahuwah. So it's Yahusha who also has made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. That's true. That's correct. Right in verse 6, the issue that is being brought to the fore is about comparing the ministration of the old covenant with the ministration of the new covenant. So the letter, which was the law, which is the commandments, if broken, condemns the sinner to death. So that when you broke the 10 commandments, right, the sentence, the judgment was that you would die. Right? That's the judgment. There's no escape. But Yahusha, the Spirit, came to give life, to provide a way of escape from the wrath of the broken law. One cannot compare the law and the Spirit, who is Yahusha, because it was Yahusha who is the Spirit that gave the law. You can't compare the Creator and the created, like I was saying. If you are going to do that, you are bringing the Creator to the level of the created. The law, the commandment, the Torah is a creation of Yahuwah. It's a creation of Yahusha, right? These laws, these commandments are subject to Yahusha. So when it comes to ministration, when it comes to service, these created cannot provide a superior service than the Creator. That's what Shaul is bringing to the fore here. It's about the ministration of the law, the letter, compared to the ministration of the Spirit. Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 45. And so it is written, the first man Adam was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Yahusha is a life-imparting spirit. Common sense would dictate that the one who formulated the law is superior to that which he formulated. But what amazes me is that Yahusha is willing to die to uphold his law, so that by his death, all who will accept him can escape the condemnation of the broken law. Not to say that when saved, you continue to stay in sin. Allow him, forbid. But that is to mean that the law will stay forever. Psalms 119 verse 142 says, thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy Torah is the truth. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 7 goes on to say, but if the ministration of death, written and engraved in stones, was esteemed, so that the children of Yashua could not steadfastly behold the face of Masha for the esteem of his countenance, which esteem was to be done away. Listen very closely to scripture. It's not saying the law is being done away. In scripture, it's saying the esteem which was to be done away. The esteem on Masha's face, the esteem that was with him, which he had taken from Yahuwah, from being in the presence of Elohim. He came with an esteem, right? That when he got to the children of Yashua, they saw that esteem that he had taken from being in the presence of Yahuwah. And that esteem was not going to stay with him forever. It was to be going away. The esteem that was on Masha's face was not a permanent esteem, right? But when you come in contact with the esteem of Yahusha, the esteem of Elohim, it does not go away. It stays permanent on him. Understand scripture. Understand scripture, what the subject being discussed is all about. The context is the ministration of the old covenant compared to the ministration of the new covenant. The esteem to be done away with from the above text is the esteem on his countenance as associated with the ministration of the covenant, right? The esteem on Masha's face was temporary. So was the esteem of the law to be superseded by the esteem of salvation of Yahusha. These two are not comparable. These two cannot be compared. Listen to verse 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 8. How shall not the ministration of the Spirit be rather esteemed? Exactly. The ministration of the Spirit is more esteemed. Right? Verse 9. For if the ministration of condemnation be esteemed, the ministration of the Torah, if it be esteemed, he's not saying it's not esteemed. He's saying if the ministration of this Torah be esteemed, much more doth the ministration of righteousness exceed in esteem. So the issue, no doubt here, about that the esteem of the ministration of the law or the Torah is not comparable to the esteem of Yahusha's righteousness. There's no doubt about that. It is more esteemed to live perfectly and righteously in Yahusha, being empowered by his life, which the Torah could not do. The law cannot give you righteousness, neither cleansing of the conscience, even though the law itself is righteous. So the spirit or the power of righteousness is more esteemed than the standard of perfection itself. And righteousness is the Torah. But to have the power to live that righteousness is more esteemed. But this does not mean you do away with the standard of righteousness, which is the Torah. For the same Shaul says in Romans chapter 7, verse 10, and the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. Why? Because you could not live according to it. It required you to live according to it. But no human being can live perfectly according to the Torah. For none is righteous, We all have sinned and have come short of the esteem, the favor of Yahuwah Elohim. And so therefore the Torah, the law, will always condemn the sinner to death. And by virtue of being born in sin, we are destined to die. But Yahusha has come to save us from that sin. Listen further. Verse 11 says, for sin taking occasion by the commandment deceived me, and by it slew me. Right? Wherefore, the Torah is Kodesh, and the commandment Kodesh, and the just and the good. Can you do away with that which is Kodesh? Which is set apart? Can you do away with that? Can you do away with that which is just and good? No, most certainly not. So you can't say Shaul in one mouth, he is saying it is done away with, and in another mouth he says it's not done away with. You can't say that. It's a lack of understanding of what Shaul is dealing with. It's a lack of understanding of the writings of Shaul. Just like Kepha said, many will twist the writings of Shaul unto their own damnation, just like what this so-called apostle is doing. So verse 18 goes on to say, Romans 7 verse 18 says, was then that which is good made death unto me? Then he says, Elohim forbid. So the law by its very self, by its very nature, which is good, it was never meant to be death to me. It was never meant to bring death to me. But what brings death to me, it is the breaking of that law. Listen to Shaul. But sin, that it might appear sin, right? Working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful. So the thing that is not good, the thing that we don't want, is sin. The Torah, the law, is good. It is set apart. It is just. And it is spiritual. We must understand what are the issues in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. The ministration of the Torah, which was written on the stones, was to be ministered in a new way by the Spirit. It was to be taken from the tablets of the stones to the tablets of the heart by the ministration of the Spirit. That's the issue, beloved. That is what is being taken into consideration here. It is the way of ministration. It is the way how the Torah saves us. It is the way how the Ruach is saving us. When you go to Jeremiah 31 verse 33 says, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Yahshua after those days, said Yahuwah. I will put my Torah in their inward parts. Do you get the newness of the covenant there? It's not annulling the Torah, right? Which is it that binds us to Elohim, right? What binds us to him is obeying his instructions, his mitzvahs. That is not done away with. The change in the covenant is in that whilst the commandments were written on the stone or in the book, whilst the law was written there, Yahuwah says he is now going to write the Torah in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. It's like it's just part of your life when it is in your blood, when it is in your system, right? You now live the Torah like you don't have to think about it. You don't have to struggle to live the Torah. It has become your second nature because of the imputation or the impartation of the life of Yahusha within you. It is the blood of Yahusha now that runs in your members. And by the very fact that it is pure blood, then it means it is the blood now running in your members that is helping you now to live a righteous life. Understand that? And verse 34 goes on to say, and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith Yahweh. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Right. And Shaul agrees with this. That is written in the book of Jeremiah. In Hebrews chapter 8, verse 10 says, For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Yashra'ah after those days, saith Yahweh. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts. And I will be to them in Elohim, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh. For all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Do you hear that? So for as long as there is forgiveness for sin, it means the standard still exists. Without the law, there is no sin. There is no transgression if there is no law. There is no need for forgiveness if there is no law. Understand this, Christians. Understand this. Hebrews 8:13 says, In that he saith, a new covenant, he has made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. Right? Shaul is consistent. The old vanishes as the esteem on it vanishes. Man is no longer commended by the works of the law, but rather by the work of the Spirit. In the old covenant, when it came to salvation, I want you to understand this. The moral law does not save you. That's why you need to understand the Torah. In the Torah, the moral law does not save you. It serves as a pointer to you what sin is. And then the sacrificial law, the Aaronic, the Levitical priesthood law, is the one that had to do with your salvation. Like that, those sacrifices, those bulls, goats, and sheep that you sacrifices were the interim solution to your sin problem, right? And to my sin problem. But they could not be able to clean the conscience. So they were not sufficient enough. They could not work out salvation. That's why they had to be removed. They had to be gotten away of. Right? He hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish. Shaul here is consistent. The old vanishes as the esteem on it vanishes. Man is no longer commended by the works of the Torah or the works of the law, but rather by the work of the Spirit, where he performed sacrifices to be forgiven. Now the forgiveness comes from Yahusha's sacrificial work. So as long as you talk about forgiveness of sin, we are talking about the law that dealt with the forgiveness of sins. The law that dealt with the forgiveness of sins was the law of sacrifices. The law that dealt with the pointing you to what sin is, it was the moral law. So once you talk about forgiveness, remember, you are not talking to the context of the moral law. You are now talking about the law that was made or given for the forgiveness of the sins of Yahshua, which is the law of sacrifices. Rightly divide the word. It's very important to do that. Hebrews 10:15 says, whereof the Ruach HaKadosh also is a witness to us. For after that he had said before, this is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith Yahweh. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. That's Hebrews 10:16. And Hebrews 10:17 says, and in their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. Verse 18. Now, where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. Do you understand that? Where there is remission for these, there is now no more offering for sin. It's very clear. that the issue that Shaul is addressing here is the forgiveness of sin. And the forgiveness of sin has got to do with sacrifices. Having therefore, verse 19, having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the most set apart by the blood of Yahusha, which is the only thing that can render us forgiveness, the blood of Yahusha, by a new and living way, which he has consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. So the new living way is attained through the blood living in us, which blood is gotten by the cutting of his flesh. Verse 21, Hebrews 10, verse 20 says, and having a high priest over the house of Elohim, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of belief, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with the pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our belief without wavering, for he is trustworthy that promised. That's what Scripture teaches, beloved. That's what Scripture teaches. Any other things that are coming up from these apostles, these prophets, these teachers of today, anything else that comes from them which is not this, it's not truth. It's not truth. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 10, the passage that Chiwenga quoted. For even that which was made esteemed had no esteem in this respect, by reason of the esteem that excelled. So he's still comparing. The esteem of the ministration of the old covenant was not comparable to the esteem of the ministration of the new covenant by the blood of Yahusha. In the old, it was ministered by the blood of bulls and goats and sheep, compared to the superior blood of the Lamb of Elohim. Verse 11. For if that which is done away was esteemed, much more that which remaineth is esteemed. Seeing then that we have such hope, we use great plainness of speech, and not as Masha which put a veil over his face, that the children of Yahshua could not steadfastly look to the end of that which is abolished. So what is that which was being abolished was not the Torah, but was the esteem on Masha. It is not the standard that is abolished, but it's ineffective ministration, right? It's ineffective ministration is it that is being abolished. Verse 14, 2 Corinthians 3, verse 14. But their minds were blinded, for until this day remaineth the same veil, and taken away in the reading of the Old Testament, which veil is done away in Mashiach. What is the veil, Mashiach? Scripture has told us that the veil in Mashiach is his flesh. Understand? We compare scripture by scripture. When you talk about the veil that covered Masha, when he came out of the mountain, that veil is compared with the flesh of Yahusha. That veil in Masha was going to be of no use to be done away with, because the esteem in Masha was going to go away anyway. You understand that? The esteem is going to go away anyway. So there is no purpose for the veil to cover his face. And that veil was representing the flesh of Yahusha. Right. We go to verse 16. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 16. Nevertheless, when it shall turn to the master, the veil shall be taken away. Right? When Yahshua turns to the master, that veil shall be taken away. When the believers turn to Yahusha, they will see that the standard cannot save them, but only shows them their condition. It is only Yahusha who can save them and transform them so that he can fit them to the standard, to the requirements of that standard. 2 Corinthians 3:17, now the master is that spirit. Yahusha is that spirit. And where the spirit of the master is, there is liberty. Do you get that? Where the Spirit of Yahusha is, there is liberty. Right? Where the Spirit of Yah is, there is freedom. Right? Verse 18. But we all, with open face, beholding as in a glass the esteem of the Master, are changed into the same image from esteem to esteem, even as by the Spirit of the Master. So what changes us? There is no way that which is perfect can be annulled or done away with or abolished, right? Right? But we are changed from esteem to esteem by the Spirit of Yahusha. But when you read in Psalms 19 verse 7, it says the Torah of Yahuwah is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of Yahuwah is sure, making wise the simple. When you go into the scriptures, the testimony also refers to the statutes, because they are testifying to the Torah, they are testifying to the moral law. And it is them that actually make you wiser. They make you to understand better the law. Right? So the Torah, the law of Yahuwah, is perfect. The testimony are the statutes that make you wiser. Right? So there is no way you can get away or you can annul that which is perfect. The statutes of Yahuwah are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Yahuwah is pure, right? Enlightening the eyes. How do you then get away with that is pure? That belongs to Yahuwah. How do you do that? Verse 9. The fear of Yahuwah is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of Yahuwah are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Right? Who can understand his errors without the Torah? Who? No one. Cleanse thou me from secret faults. You can never understand your errors without a standard that points to you that this is an error. And you can't get away with the standards. Right? It's like we are on a mirror, and then the mirror now shows you that there is a blotch on your face. Are you going to break the mirror because of the stain on your face? Or you get rid of the stain on your face and allow the mirror to continue there so that it can continue to show the imperfections on you? Ah, come on, Christians, come on. Why do you want to bash the mirror? Why do you want to break the mirror? The mirror is not the problem. The problem is the stain on your face. And there is the water, the blood of Yahusha that is capable to wash the stain. That's the solution to the broken law. Psalm 19 verse 30 says, keep back their servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be right, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Yahuwah, my strength and my redeemer. Hallelujah. Beloved, you can't do away with the commandments of Yahuwah. Let's meet in the next episode as we continue to rebut whatever Chiwenga was trying to say there. He's deceiving people. His gospel is a spell that deceives humanity. Run away from that. Hallelujah.